Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a fascinating 2021 study by Laura E. Meine and colleagues. It's called Don't Stress, It's Under Control, Neurocorrelates of Stressor Controllability in Humans, published in the journal Neuroimage. We're going to get right into the deep neuroscience of stress today, looking at exactly how just the feeling of being in control literally alters the physical structure and network activity of your brain. It's seriously mind-blowing stuff.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll unpack the stress response, then take a look inside the experimental setup. After that, we'll measure the mind and body, explore the brain network activation mechanisms, dive into the sheer power of the VMPFC, and finally bring it all home with real-world stress resilience. Let's get to it.
Okay, Section 1, unpacking the stress response and reevaluating what we think we know.
To kick things off, we really need to bust a common myth right now. The idea that all stress is created equal, or that it's just inherently bad for us. Actually, how your brain processes stress depends entirely on the context. The authors hit the nail on the head right at the start of their paper, stating, animal research has repeatedly shown that control is a key variable in the brain's stress response. This is the perfect historical hook for our scientific detective story today. You see, for decades, psychology was totally dominated by this concept of learned helplessness. The idea that humans and animals just learn to be passive when they're subjected to inescapable stress. But recent neuroscience has totally flipped the script. It suggests that it's actually control that we actively learn.
Let's look at the foundational animal models that actually pave the way for this human study. When an animal experiences completely uncontrollable stress, it triggers this massive flood of monoamines in the brain, like serotonin and dopamine. And this chemical flood actually impairs the prefrontal cortex, the logical, thinking, executive part of the brain. While that's shutting down, the stress supercharges subcortical circuits like the amygdala and striatum, which are the ancient areas driving fear and passive reflexive panic. But here is the crazy part. If the animal has control over the stressor, a totally different biological pathway kicks in. The mere experience of control fires up inhibitory pathways that physically block those hardwired panic responses. It's like flipping a neurological kill switch on fear.
All right, moving on to Section 2, inside the experimental setup, our fMRI lab tour.
So how do you even translate that kind of complex animal research to human beings? Well, the researchers used functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI scanners, to watch the blood oxygen level dependent or bold signaling in the human brain in real time. I want you to picture this. Imagine you are one of the 45 healthy participants in this study. You're lying on your back inside a loud, cramped fMRI tube. You're getting these mild, individually calibrated electric shocks to your right ankle. They described it as highly unpleasant but not technically painful. On a screen right in front of your face, visual cues start flashing. An exclamation point pops up. That means the next shock is controllable. A question mark? That means it's uncontrollable. And a simple dot just means it's a baseline trial with absolutely no shock at all.
These simple visual cues are how they built the specific experimental conditions. In the controllable or con condition, you see that exclamation point, and if you press the correct corresponding button fast enough, boom, you immediately terminate the shock. You have direct, instrumental control over your pain. But in the uncontrollable or uncon condition, it's a totally different story. You are completely at the mercy of an algorithm. The shock just terminates randomly 50% of the time, completely regardless of whether you smash the right button or not.
Okay, Section 3, measuring mind and body, the behavioral data.
Now, a really crucial part of this explainer is figuring out how the exact same physical shocks under these two distinct contexts of control actually affected the participants' behavior and physiology. First, let's look at subjective stress. With a p-value of 0.423, there was literally zero statistically significant difference in how stressed the participants felt between the two conditions. None. The physical shocks hurt just as much either way. But look at the other metrics. Feelings of helplessness were significantly lower when people had control, hitting a highly significant p-value of 0.001. And this wasn't a tiny shift. This represents a large effect size, with a partial eta-squared of 0.22. To put that into perspective, in standard research, anything over a 0.14 is considered a large effect, so the drop in helplessness was massive. On top of that, people in the controllable condition reacted way faster, p-value of less than 0.0001, with a similarly huge effect size, and they were more accurate too. They performed better and felt way less helpless, even while enduring the exact same level of perceived stress. Oh, and their heart rate was actually elevated during the controllable task compared to baseline, which shows they were highly physically engaged in the challenge.
Let's keep moving. Section 4. Brain network activation mechanisms. Looking inside the scanner. All right, let's dive into the actual functional MRI data. This is where we get to see the physical brain networks driving all this psychological resilience. Like, what is actually happening in the brain when we shift from just passively taking pain to actively controlling it? Well, structurally, we already know the ventromedial prefrontal cortex shares really dense white matter tract connections with subcortical fear centers like the amygdala. But functionally, we see this whole network spring into action. When researchers compared the fMRI heat maps, they uncovered this profound neurological divide. When they looked at the contrast between uncontrollable stress and having control, uncontrollable stress massively lights up the brain's threat areas. You can see this huge, bright activation in the bilateral insula, which is a region highly responsive to aversive, painful stimuli. But, and this is the cool part, when we look at the data for the controllable trials, that threat activity drops, and we see a distinct functional spark of activity in a totally different region, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or the VMPFC.
This perfectly illustrates the highly technical, functional mechanisms at play here. Uncontrollable stress effectively acts like a master switch that just shuts down your higher-order prefrontal cortex while simultaneously cranking up the panic centers, the amygdala. It's a recipe for feeling overwhelmed. But the sheer psychological experience of having some control, that deploys the VMPFC. The VMPFC then sends signals straight down to the brainstem to actively downregulate the monoamine nuclei. In plain English, it acts as a biological shield that literally calms down your panicked amygdala. Which brings us to Section 5, the power of the VMPFC, the biological solution. Let's zoom in specifically on the ventromedial prefrontal cortex right now, because honestly, it's the undeniable star of this explainer and arguably the biological key to human resilience. The researchers noted something highly specific about the bold signaling in this area. They wrote, the VMPFC was generally deactivated by aversive stimulation, but this effect was attenuated when participants could terminate the stressor. So, what does that actually mean for us? Well, acute stress naturally makes our higher-order thinking go dark. It deactivates the default mode network, which includes the VMPFC. However, just knowing that you have an out, knowing your actions actually matter, effectively rescues this brain region. It attenuates or lessens that stress-induced deactivation. It literally keeps the lights on. And here is perhaps the absolute most stunning finding of the entire paper, how these brain regions dictate our subjective feelings. The researchers actually extracted the parameter estimates from the VMPFC cluster and mapped them directly against the participants' subjective ratings. And guess what? They found that even under the uncontrollable condition, when the shocks were completely random and the participants had zero real power, individuals who somehow managed to naturally recruit and activate their VMPFC reported feeling significantly less helpless. It points to this incredibly powerful active biological coping mechanism. Basically, if your VMPFC stays online, helplessness literally cannot take root. Finally, we arrive at Section 6, Real-World Stress Resilience, Taking It Home. Let's bridge the gap between getting zapped with electric shocks inside a multi-million-dollar MRI machine and dealing with the overwhelming everyday stress of your actual life. What does all this data mean for us outside the lab? Well, the authors conclude with this powerful directive. Interventions should therefore aim to promote the process of recognizing, utilizing, and internalizing possibilities for consequential action in the face of adversity. Look, it's not about living a life completely free of stress. We all know that's impossible. The subjective stress ratings in the study prove the pain feels very real either way. True resilience is about finding and internalizing your capacity to take consequential action right in the middle of that stressful environment. So I want you to think about a time recently when you felt completely overwhelmed, maybe by work, personal life, or just the crazy state of world events. How might consciously focusing on the small, specific things you can control physically change your brain's network response? By finding just one actionable step to take, you aren't merely distracting yourself, you are literally forcing blood flow and activation right back into your prefrontal cortex. Discovering your agency actively turns on your prefrontal cortex. It deploys inhibitory pathways to silence your panicked amygdala, it blocks learned helplessness, and it builds genuine, lasting resilience. It is not just some cheap psychological trick, it is hardwired neurobiology. So as you leave this explainer today, I want to leave you with one question. Amidst all the chaos of everyday life, what small, consequential action will you choose to take control of today?